So I'm going to start right there. The torrid run we've seen in Bitcoin, is this all just anticipation about what a Trump administration is going to mean for it?
You know, the red wave is probably the biggest thing that's happened in the past 4 years for Bitcoin. It's incredibly auspicious for Bitcoin and for the entire crypto industry. But we're also getting a lot of very constructive support from Wall Street. BlackRock has been a very, very strong voice articulating the Bitcoin value proposition. And of course, MicroStrategy on October 30th announced that we were going to raise $42 billion to buy Bitcoin. And that's the same as saying we're going to buy every Bitcoin mine for the next 3 years. Buy every Bitcoin mine for the next 3 years. The next 3 years. So there's a lot of bullish things going on in the market right now.
How important is that appointment going to be? And who would you like to see at the helm?
I think whoever chairs the SEC has probably the most pivotal role in the entire digital assets industry. I think this is incredibly bullish for digital assets. It's very good for the crypto industry. We're going to see a lot more pro-Bitcoin policies. We're going to see a digital assets framework. We're going to see an end to the war on crypto. We're going to see a lot of pro-business policies. And I think that clearly the SEC will be a big part of it. So it's above my pay grade to have an opinion on who it's going to be. But I think it's pretty clear the House, the Senate, the White House, they're all very pro-crypto. So I expect that we'll have a very supportive head of the SEC.
As well as you've done buying Bitcoin, I'm not sure anything is really above your pay grade at this point, which leads you to the question, what do you think is the biggest threat to Bitcoin's price staying above 60K? What potentially causes another dive below 30K?
You know, I don't think it's going to 60K. It's not going to 30K. I think it's going to go up from here. I'm planning the 100K party, and I'm thinking it's probably going to be New Year's Eve at my house. So I would be surprised if we don't go through 100K in November or December. I think the biggest uncertainty in the industry was November 5th. And would you have a blue wave? Would you have a red wave? Or would you have a split Congress? And would you have any dispute about the future of crypto assets and Bitcoin? I think that was settled by the people very decidedly on November 5th. And I don't really see any threats in the near-term horizon.
Strategic Bitcoin reserve, how likely is it that that is actually established? And why would that be a good thing when you're talking about a decentralized asset now being stockpiled by a centralized government?
Well, that's being sponsored by Senator Lummis from Wyoming, and she understands the value of the frontier. The United States was built by purchasing Manhattan, then we purchased the Louisiana Territory, then we purchased California and acquired Texas, and then we bought Alaska. The next great frontier is cyberspace. And the obvious thing to do is to own cyberspace, buy the future. And so I think it's a great idea. I think it will happen. And I think it's important to the United States because it cements the United States' control over the future world reserve capital network. Senator Lummis's bill will offset $16 trillion of our debt, according to my models right now. So I think it's economically wise, it's technically wise, and again, Bitcoin is manifest destiny for the United States. I think it's economically wise, it's technically wise. Bitcoin is manifest destiny for the United States.
Have several things in common. That ultimately humankind enjoys richer existence because of the driven visionaries. But it's never an easy transition, and it's never without controversy. Today, we have two of those visionaries with us that the world will be talking about 100 years from now. In my Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy's Executive Chairman and Bitcoin Evangelist. Michael, it's so good to see you in the flesh, my man.
Here I am.
Here you are. So let's talk about this because there are three things I want to talk to you about in this. First, I want to talk about this MicroStrategy approach to buying Bitcoin because it's got Wall Street on fire. Some people are excited, some people aren't. So the strategy is essentially you're raising billions of dollars to buy Bitcoin. You have a convertible bond with arbitrage opportunities. Volatility is a financial engine. You see volatility in this certain circumstance is a positive thing and also suitable for raising money in the future. So walk us through how does it really work?
Well, you've got one group of investors that want low volatility. They want a secure, comfortable ride, so we sell them a convertible bond. You've got other kinds of investors that want super high performance, the sports car. They're buying the equity. We borrow the money from the convertible bond market at 0% interest. We buy Bitcoin, we lever up the equity, so the equity outperforms Bitcoin, and that's great for equity investors. And for the bond investors, they can't stand the equity risk, they don't want the downside risk, but they have a huge appetite for the bonds.
Now, I saw one of the critics that said, who the hell is buying these? Who's buying them? They said, why would anyone buy them? They have 0% interest.
Well, one group of people would be long Bitcoin investors. They're going to buy the bonds because they get the upside of Bitcoin without the downside. Another group of investors are convertible arbitragers. They actually buy the bond, short the stock, extract sort of a risk-free premium out of the instrument, and they can only do that with a convertible bond. They can't do it with equity, and they can't do it with Bitcoin.
You face a lot of criticism with all of this. What do you say to people who are saying, hey, you're making up financial terms? All this stuff you're kind of talking about is gobbledygook, and it's made up, and it's just sort of taking advantage of the moment in time when they sort of hit the financial hysteria, and it's not sustainable.
I would say that public companies exist to issue securities. So some fixed income investors, they want a guaranteed coupon or they want low risk and they want to participate without the volatility. Others want to make an investment. If you want to invest in New York City, you can either buy the real estate or you can invest in a company that borrows a lot of money to develop 10 times as much real estate. So we're offering investors whatever degree of risk and performance they want. And there's hundreds of trillions of dollars in the capital market that absolutely has to buy a security, and they cannot buy the commodity, so we're serving their need.
Volatility as a positive from your perspective, I think you called it or equated it to fire some earlier in the week. Explain that part.
Well, imagine I have a 40-ton weight in my backyard. It's a sculpture. That's US dollars on the balance sheet. Imagine I take the 40-ton weight and I put it on a flywheel and I spin it 60 RPM. That's a turbine. Now imagine I extend the arm a bit and I get it to go 120 RPM and I plug it into a power plant. Now I've got a reactor. And so what MicroStrategy is doing is we're tapping in that volatility. We're using $40 billion of capital to capture the energy. We're powering our equity forward and we're benefiting the entire crypto economy and the conventional capital markets.
So Michael recently had a chance to address Microsoft to explain the value of all of this Bitcoin. And I think it's a great opportunity, though, to borrow some of these slides to educate also the audience, because not everyone knows the benefits. So obviously I wanted to start with this because it dovetails into the whole conversation of the fourth industrial revolution, this technology wave, digital capital coming right after, of course, the personal computer down to AI. What distinguishes this digital capital?
Look, when we saw digital photos transform, a lot of people didn't get the fact that Kodak was going to get replaced by Instagram and Facebook, but they get digital photos. Digital capital is what happens when your long-term store of value goes from a building or goes from a portfolio of stocks to a digital asset like Bitcoin. Bitcoin represents the digital transformation of hundreds of trillions of dollars of capital in the world.
Right.
No one expected to see it, so they don't quite get what it's going to be, except for the fact it's worth all the money in the world.
So let's talk about that, because you do have you have a couple of slides showing assets around the world. First, okay, let's start with this from again geared toward Microsoft, but some critics would say when you talk about digital capital being economically and technically superior, no tax. I mean, that doesn't mean it can't be taxed in certain jurisdictions at some point. No torts. Legal issues are going to come up. No regulator. These are great points, but are they forever points?
The point is, I got $100 million in building, I got to worry about someone slipping and falling on the sidewalk and a property tax. But if I can snap my fingers and teleport the building to Zambia, Central Africa, or to Monaco, all of a sudden it's a teleportable building. And of course, if I don't have any tenants in the building, I don't got to worry about them defaulting. So digital capital is the ability to move the money at the speed of light anywhere on Earth and program it on a computer. There's a lot of people that are going to want that rather than having, pick a country in Africa where you want to invest your life savings in a building forever.
Let's say Angola.
Right, and what happens if the government fails? You lose everything.
Exactly.
But if you could put the building in your pocket and go to the place where you like the government, maybe you get to keep your money.
In your presentation, you have this slide twice. The first one, right now, Bitcoin is $2 trillion. You're saying in 21 years, $280 trillion. How do we get there?
What I'm saying is the wealth in the entire world is growing because of innovation, because of technology, but also because of inflation. And people are thinking to sell their Central African real estate to buy Bitcoin, or sell their Siberian natural gas to buy Bitcoin, or sell their Argentine currency to buy Bitcoin. So as people migrate their capital into this global monetary asset, that asset class is going to grow faster than equity, faster than gold, faster than real estate.
But also, did I read somewhere that you're saying that each Bitcoin would be worth the equivalent of $13 million?
Yeah, well, when you crank in the growth rate, which for me, the base case is 29% a year on average for 21 years, that gets you from where we are today to 13 million a coin in the year 2045.
All right, so we've talked about the financial parts of this. You and I have had great conversations in the past about the humanitarian part of this, right? And I want to talk about that. You just mentioned Africa, for instance. Bitcoin's philosophy and political promise. This is an article from 2022. It's not just a decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It's more, right? This is going to have an impact on economies, philosophy, politics, human rights, and society. That is huge to live up to.
Bitcoin is a protocol for prosperity. Fire, electricity, steel, English, mathematics. You would give them to the world. Bitcoin is an economic protocol. Once you master Bitcoin, you can figure out how to save your wealth, how to economically prosper. It works for a country, a company, a family, an individual. Nobody owns it. It's a utilitarian, egalitarian entitlement, just a good for the world. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about it.
And particularly underdeveloped nations, right? I mean, this is what we're really talking about, a way for them to catch up. I mean, right now, if you're an underdeveloped nation and you want to try to catch up, you're at the whims or the mercy of the IMF or the World Bank, who, quite frankly, they have rates sometimes that are like, that makes the mafia blush, right? I mean, to me, you're always going to be an underdeveloped nation if you have to go to the World Bank to borrow money.
If you're a type 1 diabetic, you can eat continuously and you'll starve to death because you cannot store organic energy. If you don't have a capital asset like Bitcoin, I can send billions or tens of billions of dollars to Africa. You can make billions. The money will just drain out of your capital structure because you're storing it in a currency which is collapsing faster than you can actually generate it.
Will large industrialized countries allow this to live up to its promise? It's one thing to say it's a $2 trillion asset. It's another to say, hey, eventually this will replace fiat currency, which a lot of folks believe it will.
I think you got to keep in mind money bifurcates. So the currency, the medium of exchange, of which the dollar is the world reserve currency, and capital, the store of value, of which right now real estate and equity portfolios are the world reserve capital. Bitcoin is emerging to compete with equity and real estate as world reserve capital. But those Africans, they can't buy real estate in the US. They can't buy equity in the New York Stock Exchange. It's global capital. And once you understand that, you realize that every nation that respects property rights is going to support Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If you go communist, full-on socialist, North Korea, Cuba, they're going to expropriate your property. But any place where people respect property rights and they give you a chance for capitalism and freedom, they're going to allow you to have Bitcoin. And the competitor really is, the Vanguard 500 is going to get demonetized a little bit, and then instead of buying a real estate portfolio and a third apartment, you buy some Bitcoin, and I don't think that's threatening to anybody.
Trump administration, no, because they're talking about a strategic reserve. All right, the third part of this, I got to talk about your saga, because you are such an amazing story. This right here, the headline from from the New York Daily News in March of 2000. Lost $6 billion in a day. Hotshot tech CEO loses his fortune. I mean, they blamed you for this massive crash in the stock. How did you deal with this then and stay focused to get to where you are right now?
It's very humbling. It reminds you sometimes that you need a good team and you can't do too much too fast. I wish I'd had Bitcoin back then. My life would have been a lot easier. I think having lived through all the difficulties of my 30 years in business, when I got to the point where I saw Bitcoin, I realized the elegance of
Did you have a eureka moment when you put it all together? Was there like a eureka moment? You ran out of the house with a bath towel on, like, I figured it out.
Yeah, it's everybody working themselves to death as hard as they can. They can't get ahead, and that's because you're trying to do too much, but you don't have the right savings technology. And so Bitcoin was that way out of that working myself to death.
Of course, you still have detractors now. Give me an example. I'm sure you know Jim Chanos, for instance. Of course, famous hedge fund manager known for shorting companies. He shorted Enron. This is just a recent tweet where he went after you. Now, part of this probably is because you crushed him. I mean, let's face it, he was short your stock for a long time, and I'm sure he's gotten hammered. But there are other people out there that are saying this whole thing is just sort of a P.T. Barnum act. What do you say to the folks on the street that still don't get it?
Well, I think there are a lot of successful, well-known people that just don't understand digital capital. I mean, there were successful people running Kodak. There's successful people running Xerox. And there's successful people that didn't care for the automobile or electricity. I think another decade and they'll start to appreciate it. But right now, you're going to have a lot of rich, famous people that are skeptical until they put in the 100 hours to learn about Bitcoin.
I was just telling my team, I read an article recently that 20 years after the invention of an automobile, there was a movement to get rid of it. They said, we tried it, it didn't work, it's slow, it's not as reliable as a horse and buggy. So to your point, maybe it takes some time. I can't let you go without talking about the future till you pass away, because you've talked about establishing a sort of mission, a charity to support Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin forever. What does that look like in your mind?
Well, you know, I'm reminded of the fact that Rockefeller contributed a lot of money to a lot of causes, and 100 years after his death, people are criticizing him for something that one of his charities is doing right now. So sometimes you got to be careful about big charity. But what I would say about Bitcoin, which is just wonderful, is if you accumulate a lot of wealth in Bitcoin and you just burn the keys when you leave, you're making a pro rata contribution to everybody that owns Bitcoin in the world based upon their contribution and their knowledge of Bitcoin. So I think that supporting Bitcoin as a protocol for prosperity is just a great thing to do. And otherwise, I think, you know, take the Bitcoin with you.
Yeah. Will you be known more for the economic success or the humanitarian success?
I hope I'm known for having taken the torch from Satoshi and went on to commercialize Bitcoin with corporations and governments decades after he passed.
All right. Let's remember what happened to Prometheus. Let's hope that doesn't happen to you as you try to pass the torch on. Michael, great stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you, Charles.
Great stuff.
Strategy adding to its Bitcoin hoard, purchasing 15,400 Bitcoin at about $95,000, $96,000 per Bitcoin for a total cost of $1.5 billion. The company's executive chairman tweeted, we hodl more than 400,000 Bitcoin. Joining us now, Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy executive. Your average for those 400,000 is 58,000 per Bitcoin, so it's been moving higher as you keep buying at higher prices.
We bought it about 42 times since August of 2020 to today.
The strategy is to issue stock or convertible debt of MicroStrategy and use that to buy Bitcoin.
We're a Bitcoin treasury company, so we're securitizing Bitcoin. We're providing high-performance equity. We're also providing convertible bonds. We've provided other kinds of bonds in the past, but primarily our job is to bridge the traditional capital markets that want bonds, or they want fixed income, or they want equity, or they want options. And we plug that into the crypto economy, and we use Bitcoin as the vehicle to do that.
What percentage of the public do you think understands Bitcoin at this point? If people don't even understand Bitcoin, and I still see it everywhere, that it's air, or that it's It's not like gold because you can't make jewelry out of it. Believe it or not, still people saying that because you can't touch it, that it can't be real and it can't represent money. So can we go into how you're arbitraging it to make a return?
Yeah, here's what you need to know. The S&P is about 15 ARR for the past 4 years, and the volatility of the S&P is 15. If you want to own a commodity like silver or soybeans or gold, they have very, very low performance, less than 15%, 5%, 0%. You don't really want to hold soybeans for 100 years. And sometimes they have volatility, but it doesn't last that long. Bitcoin is 60 volatility, 60 ARR, and it is a legal commodity, but it is an economic scarcity. It is the only commodity invented in the history of the human race that's absolutely capped. And so that means you can expect it to keep going up. If I can give you a commodity that outperforms the S&P index, if I can give you a commodity that's more volatile than the S&P index, you can put 100% of your liquid assets in that commodity per SEC rules. I can't do it with a security, by the way. So up until Bitcoin, people had to use gold or real estate as their commodity, or they have to use the US Treasury bill. Those are all underperforming the S&P, and they're less volatile. Bitcoin is the first thing you can use in your treasury that's more volatile, that outperforms the S&P. The result is, if I give you a security, Joe, that outperforms the S&P, how much of it do you want to buy? And if you're an ARB or an options trader, and I give you an option that is 4x the volatility of the S&P, or with MicroStrategy, we're 10x the volatility of the S&P. How much of it do you want to trade? So Bitcoin's unique in the history of the capital markets. It's the first scarcity commodity, outperforming the S&P, more volatile than the S&P, that you can put on your balance sheet.
Volatility at sometimes is not always a good thing, and it's great when something's going higher. Don't think that there'll be a drop or a significant drop that comes along? Have we moved past that because of the regulatory changes that have taken place?
I think it'll remain volatile because it's a 24/7, 365 global asset. You can panic sell it on Saturday night. You can enthusiastically buy it on Sunday morning. That's a feature. Mm-hmm. That's not a bug.
Yeah, you've lived through some of the swings, but do you think we won't see the downturns like we've seen in the past just because of the changes we've seen?
I think it's going to surge through the roof, and then it's going to surge to 180 and crash to 140, and people will be freaking out about it again. But let me make this one analogy. Volatility is like fire, and some people run away from the fire, but Henry Ford put the fire into a carriage via an engine, created an entire industry, and he gave humanity wings.
What did you do last week with the Treasury operations? You were able to generate a Bitcoin yield of 2.55%, or over almost 10,000 Bitcoin to shareholders using an arbitrage. Can you explain? Will I be able to understand this if you explain this?
We sold $1.5 billion worth of stock, backed by $500 million worth of Bitcoin.
Okay.
We bought back $1.5 billion of Bitcoin. We captured nearly $1 billion gain in the arbitrage. That we can do with equity day by day. When we do it with debt, we issue $3 billion of debt that's backed by $600 million of Bitcoin that comes due in 5 years. We pay 0% interest. We buy $3 billion of Bitcoin. We capture the $2.4 billion in the arbitrage gain up front. But then over the course of the 5 years, we double or we quadruple the investment because we're buying an asset which is appreciating faster than the asset.
What you told me was that it's 55% premium over conversion, but a zero coupon. Is that
that was a zero coupon 55. Yeah. And you can do that because Bitcoin is high vol, and the companies that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet have even higher volatility. So Mara is a great example. 2 weeks ago, they did a $1 billion convert, zero coupon, to buy Bitcoin. This week, they're back in the market doing another $1 billion convert, zero coupon, to buy Bitcoin. You can rinse and repeat that frequently.